So my name's Nasim Fluker, and I'm the principal at ThrdSpace. And welcome to our final salon of our summer series, which we started to explore the theme of community building in Atlanta. ThrdSpace was founded in 2015 as a social impact project, always driven by a desire to cultivate interdisciplinary and culture-driven conversations about the issues that impacted us the most. 6 years later, we're proud to still be committed to connecting people to places and to each other in both Atlanta and beyond. And we do this through our consulting work, where we try to make community building easier for organizations through strategic planning, program development, and unique experiences such as this salon series. And this summer, we've been exploring the idea of community building in Atlanta, how we use modes like Afrofuturism and community development to dream up new worlds, how to ensure our communities are intellectually grounded and rooted in our legacies. And this final salon will be exploring how communities can change and evolve, or how they don't, while holding on to those legacies. So we've called this salon The Return of the G, a reference to our hometown heroes, Outkast. The title speaks to the recent migration and sometimes reverse migration of Black folks to Atlanta that's been alluded to in both positive and more critical ways. For example, in the book, The Devil We Know by Charles Blow, and campaigns in Atlanta such as Atlanta Influences Everything or We Full, and a rising conversation about who really gets to rep the city and claim it. So we invite you to stay tuned to hear from our panel of ATLians who are in one way or another influencing that conversation, and have some thoughts on what might be needed to create the social infrastructure we need to thrive. And with that, I'll hand it over to Clint Fluker to introduce the panel.
All right, so thank you again, and welcome to the Return of the G. My name is Clint Fluker, and I'm a co-founder of ThrdSpace, and I'm just so excited to introduce this panel. I can't believe we got all of y'all to say yes to this, so thanks. Everyone on this panel just embodies the Atlanta that we know and love, and I can't just wait to have this conversation with y'all. So I'm going to start us off with a few introductions. First, I'm going to start with Andrea Young, who was very instrumental in even getting this topic together for us. This topic was something that was close to her heart, and so we really built this panel around the ideas that came out of those conversations with ThrdSpace and Andrea Young. So again, Andrea Young is the executive director of the ACLU, American Civil Liberties Union of Georgia. Under her leadership, the organization has increased staff, membership, and influence working through the courts, the legislature, and engaging the community to promote and protect civil rights and civil liberties. Young has received numerous awards for her work as an attorney, an author, a nonprofit leader, documentary filmmaker, and educator. There's many other things. It could go on forever, but thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We are also joined by Jai Ferrell. Jai is the Assistant General Manager of the Commercial Development at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. She serves on the Global Marketing and Communications Committee for Airports Council International, North America, and has been recognized as Airport Business Magazine's top 40 under 40 executives in the aviation industry. She is a Spelman grad and a LEAD 2017 graduate, so you know we close. Come on, Jai. All right. And then last but not least is M. Trey Watson. Melvin Trey Watson is the Senior Director of Strategy at BrightHouse, a Boston consulting group company with over 10 years of building and leading strategic partnerships in startup and turnaround environments across public, nonprofit, and private sectors. He deals in big business, y'all. But he's also an artist, a household dance-off champ, problem solver, Aquarius, dream catcher, thinker, father of prodigies, and advisor. He's also my big brother. So if we can give everybody a nice digital round of applause, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm just going to start us off with some questions that hopefully just sort of builds into a conversation. And you can just sort of jump in when you feel like you got an answer that you want to share. And the first question I'm going to start off with is, how do you see today's Atlanta influencing the youngest generations? your children, you know, grandchildren, people you're familiar with, how do you see this Atlanta influencing their upbringing? And how does it differ from yours?
Well, I have a great story about that because I've recently engineered to get my daughter back to Atlanta. And one of the things I discovered is that my granddaughter's classmate, his father is a US Senator, right? So only in Atlanta can a little Black kid be in your class and their father is a US Senator, right? And that, I think, to me, that just really sums up the kind of generational thing we've been able to do in Atlanta, where when I came to Atlanta as a 5-year-old, in Atlanta was a segregated city, but people have really persisted and been strategic and leveraged. You'll hear me say this over and over, the book, The Ballad and the Buck, really leveraged that to create opportunity, create a sustaining, not just Black middle class, but really upper middle class. And so it's a very different environment than the one I grew up with, but created by the people I grew up with. So the people I grew up with had that hope. At the ACLU, we have a thing of hope, vote, advocate. So people, the adults of when I was a kid, they had that hope. That Atlanta could be better and could be a place where all Black children could thrive. And they set about making that come true. And so now, my granddaughter, I hope, is in a position to reap the benefits of that.
So working for the busiest airport in the world, I travel all over. And I often enter rooms, and many of them, in those rooms, people don't look like me, whether it's a person of color, whether it's being a woman, and in a leadership position, a senior leadership position. First of all, they think I'm some Indian man because of my name. I'm like, you obviously didn't Google me before I got here or looked at my LinkedIn. But outside of that, only because of the Maynard Jacksons and the Herman Russells and the Andy Youngs and the Dr. Walter Youngs and the many mentors that I've been able to have, I've been able to be in this seat and to look like I look and to thrive in this space. So I tell, my name's Jai, and I have this thing where I say I'm Fly Jai, and I was always taught to learn that I could fly. I believe that 100%, that there's nothing I can't do. Well, that's because I had grandparents and a mom and godparents who 100% made me believe that. I went to the right schools. I went to Spelman, where, Christine King Ferris was teaching still when I was at Spelman, and that's Dr. King's sister. So you start learning that the culture and what you have is right literally in your backyard or in the seat next to you. In the case of Miss Andrea's granddaughter, that only that happens in Atlanta. I didn't get my first white teacher probably until I got to Spelman. And what I mean by that, I grew up in a very Black area, so I didn't know that you had to have a different type of educator. I mean, I had a couple of mentors and some basketball coaches that were non-melanated, but when I got to Spelman, I learned that there were girls who grew up where their first Black teachers were their freshman professors, and I was like, that is so random, simply because I was immersed in Blackness and I was taught to love that. And only in Atlanta do you get that, where you don't feel like the minority, but the other folks feel like the minority when they enter into your space.
Yeah, I think we all share that experience of being surrounded by this greatness that looks so familiar to you. As you all know, I have 2 young ones. I have a third on the way because I still got it. And they are elementary school age. And
your wife still has it.
She's got the most of it.
Hands up, let them know, Miss Young, let them know.
I am laying claim to all the greatness that is afforded me. Thank you, Miss Andrea. They're elementary school age, and I moved them from New York to Atlanta about 3.5, 4 years ago. And while I would, of course, come back and forth to Atlanta, fairly frequently, at least for holidays, what I could not imagine is what I saw as a new resident. Growing up in Atlanta, I had always been aware that the city is either Black or white, depending how far north or south you go, which, yeah, very little to speak of in between those margins. As a student at Westminster, yes, I had Asian friends. I believe all were probably Korean, and that was lovely. But unless you found yourself on Buford Highway, generally speaking, you rarely saw, spoke with, or even enjoyed any real time with them. Today, Atlanta is so much more diverse than I remember it. Most certainly in color, but beyond the color of skin, there's this color of taste. The food game we were talking about earlier is drastically changed for the better, I would say. The industry here is much more than Coke, Home Depot, what used to be Bell South, right? It's startups. It's a new sense of engagement, whether that be engagement as an activist or even as someone who's simply trying to start something. Entertainment has always been here, but we're really leading it. And I see my kids, just as Andrea, you shared, in classrooms with families who have a very different background, and very often a mixed background, which is not something that I saw. And while that mix of culture, if I did see it, used to be predominantly Black or white, now it's Black and Indian. Now it might be someone from the Middle East who happens to have raised a family here. There are different languages in line. And I'm looking forward to what that means for them, but I'm keenly aware of, without some sense of grounding in what Atlanta is, quite frankly, the city loses a direction, and they won't know Atlanta the way that I know it.
Thank you. That actually creates a wonderful segue into the next question that I have for y'all. One of my favorite T-shirts that I'm not wearing today says "Old Atlanta" on it, and that designates that there must be something old and that there's something new that's occurring. And what we're really interested in, kind of getting your opinion on, is what parts of old Atlanta do you want to keep, and what would you like to see change?
So, of course, I wrote a book to keep the good things about old Atlanta, called The Making of Modern Atlanta. I think probably very controversially, the respectability. I think respectability as a strategy is something that has been effective for, certainly since my grandparents' time, and has really, that could be its whole nother conversation about respectability politics in our community, right? The responsible leadership. We have been tremendously blessed with leaders who took responsibility to fix things. I mean, they listened to Dr. May. The thing I quote the most about Dr. May is people who see the ills of society and take responsibility to change them, and that is a successful person. That definition of success, I think that's rooted in old Atlanta. And then the church culture. One of the important things about church culture is that the church, even today, is the only thing Black people do that white people can't interfere with, right? We pay the salaries, we pay the mortgage. We are in control. It's really the only institution we are fully in control of, and that can represent us. And that's why the civil rights movement came out of the church, why politicians keep coming out the church, why our US Senator came out the church, because this is where we have our maximum influence and self-determination. So those are three of the things of old Atlanta I think are really critical.
I have a follow-up to that before we move on to the rest of the panelists. So you said that it might be controversial to talk about respectability. And yes, you're right. We could definitely have a whole conversation about respectability politics. But I was wondering if you could explain a little bit more what you mean by respectability politics in the context of old Atlanta. And that way, as people respond, we can have a conversation and everybody knows where we stand.
Sure. So, there is, I guess sometimes now we call it code switching. I mean, there is a thing that says you are carrying enough burdens right? And so learn how to, how to comport yourself in a way, that is consistent with, the sort of white middle class culture. That's what they do at Spelman and Morehouse. People go to Spelman, they wear the suit, they learn, they speak, they read, and so it's not to say that that's how you define yourself, but you are a minority in a majority culture that values these things. So you learn how to comport yourself in that way. And that's not to say that you're saying that that is a better way, but you understand that you can be multicultural, and in order to really, thrive. And I think we have, a lot of organizations like, like our sororities, for example, where they learn how to run a meeting. They learn, they learn a lot of the tools and the sort of hidden culture that is dominant in America right now. You learn the rules of that culture in a safe environment, and that allows you then to succeed and play the game. And I think we saw that in Atlanta. One of my favorite quotes from Ivan Allen is, he said, when we started negotiating over the student movement sit-ins, the Black people had more Phi Beta Kappa keys than we did, right? And so that is a thing that is true in Atlanta that has been an advantage. And it's important for us to acknowledge that that has been one of the things that has allowed the Black community to prosper. What we do with that, is up to you, but it's important to understand that it has been an effective tool in how we have been able to prosper.
I'm the 100% chameleon. So I can go from bankhead to buckhead to pinups to the Blue Flame, and then back into the church and run a meeting, because that's where I learned how to public speak in church. So from the Easter speeches to how to govern self, to how to prepare, to actually Toastmasters. I entered Toastmasters in church at 7. So I've been in it for my whole life. So everybody's like, have you always been like this? Yes, I'm 100% manufactured by my ancestors to be this amazingly and this great. But to the point of the church, and then we can talk about this in a more in depth, I think the challenge we have is the uninformed using the platform of social media. And before, you would go to the church for your information, right? You will go for your collaboration, you will go for community, you will go for food, you will go for fellowship, you will go for family. And especially in a post-COVID, I want to call it pseudo-normal, because I think we're still trying to figure that out. The concerned Black clergy and those groups would intentionally go to the Black church to figure out, who's going to be up next, who's going to be the next mayor, who's going to be the next whoever that the group and the quorum is going to be around. And I think to a degree, some of that idea of the machine or the quorum has changed a bit than what it used to be. But I do think it's because of the accessible information that you can get from social that we did not have before, right? So you don't have to wait for your pastor to tell you who to vote for president or these things anymore, because you can go Google it yourself, or something like that. So that's one thing about the church that I think that we need to hold on to, simply because that sense of community and that access that you get in that space and that structure that you have in the church, we're losing it very quickly, especially in the neighborhoods in Atlanta, like my church neighborhood, which is in the Bluff, which is now being called West Midtown or whatever they're called in the West Side, which is hilariously funny. But another thing I wanted to make mention of about the old Atlanta versus the new Atlanta, I think it's okay to keep the love of the old Atlanta. I think it's okay to keep the passion. But I think the challenge I have is the resistance to want to change and deserve better. So there is a group chat on Facebook. I'm very rarely on it, but Skip Mason, who's a very articulate writer, political, all of those things, has this group, right? And so lately the whole trend has been putting up these houses that are like $500,000 or something that was, a shack or something that was filled with blights prior to. And so I always play devil's advocate of, well, why didn't you get it when it was $20,000? Because you didn't want to live there. Why didn't you care about your community before somebody else had to come in and tell you that your community was valuable, right? The fact that Chickamauga, we just talked about that with Miss Young, my big mama stayed on Sharon Street, right at the mouth of Mosley Park. But on that same corridor of MLK, Hank Aaron lived there too. And there's tons of people, and him and Miss Billy, that there are tons of folks who lived in that corridor in that area. And for whatever reason decided to leave, or for my godparents, it was about the stairs, right? They had stairs in the house, they couldn't do that anymore. But you start thinking about the fact that you should value what you have before someone has to come and tell you that it's worth something. You deserve more than just a Foot Locker and maybe a nail shop at a mall. You deserve more than a Popeyes on the corner, albeit quick service, fine, but that also leads into so many other social economic issues. We can go down the rabbit hole of that, but I think it's wanting my old Atlanta family to want more, to deserve and command more, and welcome that, which comes with some of the byproduct of New Atlanta. We went over to Chattahoochee yesterday to the Works, never been over there before. We used to get mattresses and some antique materials over there. But it's a whole corridor of, food halls, and there was a Feistis Brothers and cornhole and all these other things that could be markers for gentrification. By definition, I'm a gentrifier. My friend told me that, which was hilarious. We'll get into that later. But the idea that you didn't think you deserved anything before, right? And you didn't value and you didn't care. And I'm not sure if it could be economic mobility, it could be investors, it could be so many financial literacy, it's so many things that are impacted in that. But you complain when that house was, when it was a shack, you didn't care. But now that it's something that somebody turned into something else, there's issue. Well, if you didn't sell or you didn't flee. So that's a whole conversation that goes into that, from an old Atlanta to a new Atlanta. But I really want old Atlanta to understand that you do deserve more. Like you don't have to go to Ansley or Buckhead, or used to at least, to get something and be something of qualitative value. You deserve to have that in walkable distance in your own neighborhood.
If I could, I would build on that. Having left Atlanta, I think I might have been the only one, almost the only one in the family to have not gone to Morehouse or Spelman.
Oh, bless your heart.
What's that?
We still love you, man. It's okay.
Bless your little heart. Is what I
thank you. Yeah, thank you. I need every blessing, and the longer you all spend comforting me, the better I will feel about myself and my place. But having left Atlanta to go to school, and only came back only for a short spell before going up north. Coming back, I can say that getting into the rhythm has been difficult for me. So I think about, what do I recall about old Atlanta? One of the things, or landmarks even, I recall vividly is driving by two structures every morning on the way to school. In my school's in Buckhead, drove by Herman Russell's house, and then drove by the Blue Flame to get to 285. And went to Buckhead and came right back. And what I found to be natural at the time, but only remarkable having seen nothing quite like that after living outside of Atlanta for some period of time, is that we lived together, whether it was considered bankhead and blue collar, or upper class Black aristocracy in Collier Heights. We lived together. And so the church was a place for communion, I agree, but it was also these places to learn habits, practices, not only etiquette, but styles of speech. All of these things I think were very true. And coming back, not feeling quite like I knew how to get a hold of that. I don't know that we necessarily have to remain in that sort of living situation. I moved to Virginia Highlands in large part because I feel like I wanted to lay claim to it. It's been owned and operated by people who don't look like me for way too long. It's like, I did this absolutely on purpose. But there's a trade-off to it. My kids do get to go to a lovely school. It's a public school, fairly diverse, but it's not how I grew up. And I am figuring it out. And I know that I will, but right now I haven't quite figured out how to do it as part of community, kind of figuring it out as part of close family.
Thank y'all for taking us on that journey. That was a excellent response to that question. And I'm really trying to think about how we think about this new Atlanta and what it means. So the question I have for you now is, what do you think is or what concerns do you have about the current Black migration to Atlanta? This is going back to this idea of Charles Blow's book, The Devil You Know, where you have so many people from around the country coming back in to Atlanta and to Georgia writ large, but from places like New York, Trey, where you used to live, New Jersey, from LA, from all over the country. And many of these people are Black families who have a connection here already or would like to find a community here in the city. So we're going to talk about the positive things about this next, but what concerns do you have about the current migration to Atlanta, if any?
Well, I understand that, one is, we didn't really start talking about the city versus Atlanta. And so a lot of people move to Atlanta, but they find out that they moved to Georgia, not Atlanta, right? So there's the city of Atlanta. And the city of Atlanta is sort of the golden goose, right? The city of Atlanta is what produces the prosperity. It's what protects the Black community in Georgia. It's what creates the sort of economic opportunity. And so part of it is that, not understanding that the city of Atlanta has to be protected, in my view. And then not contributing, right? Sort of a lot of folks who get on, they're riding the train, but not paying the fare. And so part of the important thing about Atlanta, sort of traditionally, we talk about, Herman Russell and Jesse Hill and people, Jesse Hill put a mortgage on his house to help pay bail for the student sit-ins, right? And so people who like what is generated from Atlanta, but aren't willing to get engaged either through civically, in the politics and supporting institutions, even in supporting the, AUC, Urban League, NAACP. The things that really are required to keep Atlanta a place where people can even have these conversations and have some realistic expectation that you can actually take ideas that generated from this and go do something about it. And so it's the giving back. We have this, or is it's like make money, give back. Like in it, for me in Atlanta, if you have real money, then you're contributing to something. Whether it's, and so that's really been a tradition, Black and white. And I think a lot of times that ethic is not true necessarily, in other parts of the country, but that ethic of really making sure that you're contributing to sustain the environment that makes this a place that you want to be.
I think we go back to the city too busy to hate, right? So everybody, I know all kinds of crazy stuff about the airport, probably way more than one should know. But how it became to be, and then the adding of the Jackson, that name, I think is the lack of historical understanding or the desire to want to know how Atlanta became Atlanta, right? So from friendship and the churches that have been demolished for new structures for tourism and that dollar, all the way down to relocating other structures that have reverence and understanding, and folks just don't know what it means. We went to, where did we go for breakfast this morning? So we went down, we ended up coming back to Rosie's because there was traffic and there wasn't nobody in there, so we went. And so I literally live in Castleberry. I live right in here. And a matter of fact, I lived on top of Pascal's for several years, where Mr. Russell, before he transitioned, would eat in the morning. And you literally are speaking to someone. And I remember him telling me, like, I used to, this thing came out of renovating bathrooms. And I was like, line. Like, you know, you can understand that, but being able to have a conversation with that kind of person. I'm on the board for the Andy and Walter Young YMCA. So I get to see Dr. Young once a month. Usually I'm or Ambassador Young fairly frequently. They know me by name. And that's insane to me because these are the same people that you can Google and you're like, oh my God, you know, what does that mean? But that comes with the price of understanding my ancestry, right? And how Atlanta became to be. And I think the folks who live, whether it be in the Highlands, whether it's in the Freedom District near Boulevard, in those places, they don't understand and value really where they live, where in fact, you know, MLK is buried literally steps away from where you live. And you don't understand what that means because you did it because of the convenience, the cool food and beverage locations, and the fact that you had a bike trail. And so I think understanding where you are, and I during COVID, I took the intentionality of walking my neighborhood, looking not just at the murals, but what some of the infrastructure in the building was, and the reason I chose Castleberry was because it was Black owned, and this is where Mr. Russell laid a lot of his foundation, whether it be infrastructure, buildings, the lofts, all of that. But I wanted to know what that meant, right? Like I wanted to understand why it was what it was and the configurations all the way down to, you know, what really happened in Summer Hill with I-20 coming through and breaking up the Black communities and all that. Because my big mom and my grandmother made sure we knew that because they would tell us how you used to can take a bus to get to here, there, or, you know, we had our own kind of Black Wall Street on Auburn Avenue and what that meant and what it means now not to have that. And so yeah, it's beautiful and it's walkable and they have a park and a dog park and all those things, but do you really know on what sacred ground you stand? And so that is my challenge. The folks who come in who don't understand that Atlanta's a very special place, but it's special because there's blood in the street, it's blood in the soil that makes us being able to live where we live, but you don't even understand where you stand. Like, and that to me is a problem when I talk about who lives here and, you know, MLK living up the street, even down off of Sunset, and like being able to ride by and be like, that's MLK's first house before he reloaded, and you know, all those things. And people are like, what are you talking about? I'm like, okay, this is a problem for both, you know, the melanated and unmelanated, particularly being here, because you don't even understand, and a history that's not passed on is a history that's forgotten. So I think it's really important to for people to value where they are and understand where you stand.
I love that. I absolutely agree with that. The fear is my fear, if any, is probably rooted in the loss of story, narrative, history, because therein lies the foundation of culture, right? That shared practice, that shared ambition, the aspiration for what the city can be without losing what it must be in order to get there. And if anything, I worry that I play an unintentional part in going off rail. I mean, if I'm concerned at all, it probably is that I'll say we in the royal sense, the royal we perhaps are not doing enough to make new residents almost to the point of imposition feel like Atlantans, right? So you have individuals coming, whether regardless of color, background, they are coming from another place with a very different story and probably an unfair to some degree expectation of what this city is supposed to be. They have a dream, they have an expectation of themselves, they have a desire to do something, but they themselves have, as I hear you saying, Ms. Andrea, they have not necessarily contributed to the story yet. And without telling them in some way what chapter we're on, then they're going to write the story on their own. And in some cases, that kind of friction can be really creative. I mean, I think the explosion of industry is a positive result of that kind of friction, but we see how the youth are acting up right now. There's a lot of negative friction that really has to do, I think, with a growing generation of people of every background who are thinking more, they're coming in on a different chapter, and they're feeling kind of the way Jay-Z felt, right? My presence is charity, right? If I get mine, if I do what I am supposed to do, no matter how I get it, that is charity, right? Like I'm making it better. Now, the thing about it, that's not the Atlanta way, right? The Atlanta way is more rooted in, we're just too busy to hate, but that grind is a community grind, right? There's a humble beginnings that I think is very unique to Atlanta that is not Brooklyn, that is not LA, maybe a little bit Mobile, but even then it's different. And I don't know necessarily how we, again, to the point of imposition, if needs be, invite people into that narrative. I'm sure telling it is part of it, but I can tell you as a returning Atlanta native, fourth generation, I don't hear it being told. I don't feel it being told. And I'm not necessarily okay with it, but because I'm not fighting against it, I do feel like I might be complicit.
But I think both of those things can coexist, right? So one thing I always value about my grandmother and my mom, and so even when we moved to Decatur and we still commuted to go to Lindsay Street Baptist, which is my family church, is over 100 years old. Lindsay Street is in the Bluff. Has always been. As a matter of fact, we relocated about 20 something years ago across from our old edifice over to the new location that's actually on the corner of Joseph E. Lowry, Boulevard, Ashby. For those, that's another great way infrastructure can do it, by renaming the streets and other spaces. It forces individuals to understand, well, who is this person and why is it named that? And that's a way to help educate, I think, depending upon who you are. But you're like, okay, well, why do we change it from Ashby to Lee Street, or Hollowell to whatever it's going to be? And so I think that's a way to do it in a very small way, to provide some reverence of people and sacrifice. But what I loved about going to church, whether it was Vacation Bible School or Girl Scouts, which was very crazy because we were partners with Mount Moriah, which is up the street, Antioch, and also with Warren Methodist, that's right up the street as well, is it was all walks of life at our church. I wasn't, I think I would say lower middle class. I mean, I didn't go without anything. I had a great education. I had a car, I didn't have to work, those kinds of things. But I remember Miss Peggy living across the street, and the lady next to her, Miss Grayboy, they were the candy ladies in the community. And now, even if I need to cut through really quickly and make a quick right on North Avenue and go straight up, I don't fear being there because the Bluff feels comfortable to me because I grew up over there. Nobody's gonna, try to rob me or anything because they know I'm Rosa's granddaughter, or at least they know of me from being at the church. And I think that's what I loved about, my church being so rooted and connected, because I remember the change of the crack era in that area, in that neighborhood, and it changed fast. And I remember English Avenue, because that's when my grandmother went to elementary school, and she also went to Washington High School. So I remember this shift, and it happened very quickly. But it was heartbreaking for me the other day when I was going down, because my boyfriend also lives now, and he's lived off of Hortense in the West Side Park for years. So it's hilarious now that since the quarry is open, everybody's over there and riding their bikes. It was a real estate agency called Exit. That's the name of it. It's called Exit Realty, and it's right on Bankhead. And now what they're trying to coin is Bellwood, right there. And the idea that it feels like they want people to leave. I mean, the name of it's Exit Realty, right? So what does that mean? That's a very, very direct adverb to be naming a brand after that. You're telling people exactly what you want. But I do think it's important that we don't lose the Miss Peggies and we don't lose the Miss Bray Boys. And as they perish, that their families find value or telling those stories again, because it's so important when they talk. I learned what English Avenue meant from James English, meaning the mayor, the name that was named after the mayor of the city. I didn't know that before. I got that from Miss Peggy, and so being able to tell that orating, the storytelling is really so important. But again, it goes back to they still deserve better, right? Like the Circle K shouldn't be where she gets her produce, but it was, because it's a grocery desert. And when we did have Publix, the loss prevention put it out of business, and it was a blank for a while. And then it came back as a Walmart, which is still subpar with regard to the food and beverage it offers. So I do think there's a cross section where, and maybe it's us, Trey, maybe it's us that the responsibility and the onus is for us to fill that gap. Because there's a huge gap in me selling Girl Scout cookies and the Water Boys, right? Those are two completely different things. And I think we have to take some responsibility and being okay with that burden, because it's heavy. But I think if everybody puts their shoulders in, we can lift that up. But I do think there's a gap there, but we have an opportunity right now.
And I think it's important, with all that to remember that, Atlanta is, the city of Atlanta now is 495,000 people in a metropolitan area of 6 million, in a state that is controlled by, right-wing Republicans who, and in a society that is still very much dominated by, poorly regulated capitalism.
Mhm.
And so there are many of these forces, the elimination of the kind of resources that, when Jimmy Carter was president, there was 3% money for old people to fix up their houses, right? West End was gentrified by Black people because there was affordable financing for people to do that, right? And so there are a lot of forces that are much larger than the city of Atlanta that govern so many of these things. But once again, Atlanta is really in a position to then influence the national dialogue about what do we owe one another as a society? What is acceptable? What kind of resources should be there to enable kids to have recreation centers and not be, so they should be at a recreation center on a playing field with a coach, not on a corner with a water bottle. And so I think there are a lot of those kinds of things that are things we certainly want better for Atlanta, that are part of how Atlanta affects the national dialogue. And we have in the past, and we can again, and we are now doing that. But to really say what we want for, so that everybody thrives, so that old people don't have to choose between the roof falling in or leaving the house where they raise their kids. And so I think that is a really important, conversation, Jai, and I think it's one that is something you can't solve in Atlanta. We did a lot in Atlanta with neoliberalism. I think we're ready to move on from that and just actually have, people like getting that check now for their, their under 18 kid that's at home. We have the worst family policies in the developed world in the United States. So there are a lot of things that are structural that we feel in Atlanta because we care, we want to do something different. But these are things that have to be changed, really at the national level and at least at the state level.
I have just sort of listening to all of this conversation, I'm hearing a few themes show up, and I really only have 2 more questions for y'all, but they point directly to where we are right now. I'm hearing a lot about history and the need to kind of share these stories that we have about our families and about the structure of the city. And I'm also hearing quite a lot about church, and Trey knows if my parents and grandparents knew that I was running a panel about church right now, they'd laugh out loud, but that's okay. I just want to bring us back to this idea of family, though, and this idea of how we got here, because that's where we kind of left off. What is your family's connection to Atlanta? When did they get here? Where did they settle? And what were their hopes and dreams for you? And with this panel, I can only imagine. This is a great question for y'all. So please, when did they get here? Where did they settle? And what were their hopes and dreams for you?
So my family came, I think 1960, to work in the civil rights movement. My father was born in Louisiana, my mother in Alabama, but we later have found out that actually I have ancestors that came to Atlanta from Athens during Reconstruction, were part of founding Antioch Baptist Church, and actually tried to integrate the Opera House. So we came here, then moved to Mosley Park, then later to Southwest Atlanta, where my dad still lives in Southwest, off of Cascade.
My family is from Washington, Wilkes County. It's not too far from Athens, Georgia. As a matter of fact, I still pay family taxes on a place called Jim Drinker Place, which was a slave plantation. My grandmother's father's mother, my Aunt Martha, I never met her, but I have tons of pictures. I wish I could show you. I have a heritage wall. I take all the photos. They reload from Washington, Wilkes County to up here, 1800s, late 1800s or so. And then settled right into the what is the now English Avenue community. And that's how my great aunts and my grandmother's sisters ended up at Commodore and Commercial. The connection to Antioch, which is interesting, is the pastor, H.M. Alexander, his son is now the pastor at Antioch and Lindsay Street, because they literally went from one end of the street to the next. So that's our connection. And that's for both my grandmother and my grandfather's side. So they both reload at the same time. So yeah, it was my great grandfather's mother who came first.
And I am surrounded by royalty here. My Atlanta roots, as Clint and Nassim and Miriam know, stem from my father's side. My mother's side is West Indian, by way of Jamaica and Cuba, and it was through marriage that she found her way to Atlanta. As I understand it, I'm fourth generation Atlanta. My great grandfather, Peter O. Watson, was a deacon at Ebenezer Baptist Church. And so my grandfather grew up in those pews in Old Fourth Ward. He did go on to make education and Christianity his ministry. He pastored at Liberty Baptist Church for, I'm sure, well over 30 years and taught as a professor of theology, philosophy, religion, schools around the country, but the majority of his career was at Morehouse. My father and his younger sister went to Booker T. Washington High School. My father, like his older brother, and my grandfather, graduated from Morehouse College. So education and Morehouse are pretty big in the Watson family. So after going away for college, I had to come back intentionally to make sure my kids got their bona fides. And I think Ms. Andrea, you spoke really eloquently about the responsible leadership. That's what I recall, responsible leadership. And we talked about how the church has been one pillar of our community for which we have assumed great responsibility, but also we have necessary control. Growing up in the Watson and Fluker house, education probably had as much, and for me, a greater message from which to kind of write my own story. And I would say, again, coming back into Atlanta, the one thing that I know we have to keep sight of is the institution of education.
Absolutely.
The woman who first gave me a spanking was a second grade teacher, Miss Hamilton, and she was at my high school graduation. You know what I mean? Grew up with educators in the house, grew up around that royalty. But those pillars really, the church and education served as a necessary foundation. And I do believe that it's through that education, not just at the collegiate level, but very much at primary school level, that we will be able to cultivate a kind of talent that is capable and therefore responsible to write the next chapter of Atlanta's story. Without that, we really will be at the will of those who come from the outside, which I have all love for, but who have very different understandings of the city and they're here, generally speaking, because they are fully capable, right? Of writing. They came here to go to college, or they went to college somewhere else and they came here to start a business or to jump on the bandwagon that whatever future's writing, they want to be a part of it. All of that is beautiful. But I can tell you that one of the things that I know is of great concern is that the school system in Atlanta public schools is not what I remember. I literally had the choice of 3 schools that I was comfortable sending my child to. And I couldn't risk the lottery for a great charter. And that's not fair. And they're all where I am in Virginia Highlands area, or just below Ponce. Anything south of that, west of that, those kids I know are being led as best they can by well-intentioned people, but it's just not quite what I remember. And that will fail us in the long run if we're not able to address it.
Well, we hope my Spelman sister, Lisa Herring, can do her job
There it is.
and things. But again, that goes back to, but I want to go back. You mentioned something about the institution. So my godmother, and I bring her up a lot. So just so you understand, she graduated from Spelman in 1946. My godfather graduated from Morehouse 1948. And so ever since I was a little girl, that's all I knew. I had a poster that said, "Let her first steps be towards Spelman." So there was no other choice. And I was a hooper. I was a really good basketball player, and that was not on my mind at all when it came to college. I did it because my family liked it, not because I really cared that much anymore. But I recall when we would get off the exit, my grandmother would get off on Lee Street on purpose so that we could ride through, and she could be like, "There go your friends. Y'all going to the football game." And so and then the Girl Scouts that I was in, Troop 1881 from the church, we would go over to the Edelman Center at Spelman and we would do things there. So it's in the five. I live in Castleberry. I'm literally maybe 5 minutes from 350 Spelman Lane right now. Not even 5 minutes if there's not a red light. So it was a part of who I didn't learn about college because I got to high school and was like, okay, I got to pick somewhere. It was in the fiber of who I was as a young person. But what was interesting, and I mentioned my godmother, when she was at Spelman, they had a feeder system to where she became a kindergarten teacher at Dean Russ Elementary School. And so she left there, she graduated from Spelman, went to Dean Russ to teach. And you know what was in her classroom? Spelman stuff. So the kids at Dean Russ were getting a touch point of her while in her classroom, but it also was the feeder connection they had with APS at the time and with the AUC, to where you had this where folks, even those who were coming to school for education and higher learning, if they were going to become educators, they stayed, which is why Cascade is what it is, which is why certain areas of Moseley Park are what they are, because most of those individuals stayed there, right? They stayed and they cultivated in the community, which is why you have that level of Black wealth. But I do think, though, infrastructurally, when it comes to the school system, there are some other things that just need to be completely dismantled in order for it to be right. But if I'm going to be honest, would I send my kid to, you know, a school prior to what Grove Park is now, to Grove Park Elementary? Probably not. Do I feel comfortable with them going to Washington High School? Not just yet. And I don't have children. I have tons of godkids, but we sent my goddaughter to Wesley on purpose because of what it is. So you're right. Like, I think that is something we should discuss, but I also don't think Gigi Gabrielle has the skin to go to a Washington versus a Maynard Jackson High School, just because I know that profile of kid, now albeit may change a bit. And her mom and dad live off of Sales Avenue, so they're right here in the middle of the neighborhood. But I don't feel comfortable with her going there because that she is not. I would fear for my goddaughter going to that school, and not for any other reason than she's not capable of that type of transition, that chameleon that we talked about, being able to go from zone to zone. She doesn't have that. She doesn't have that fight in her. And I would fear for her going to that school, and not because of any other reason than the community is changing right before our eyes, but there are still some things in the community that are still very systemic and very challenging. And from a parental perspective, no, that's not where she's going to school. And I'm not embarrassed to say that. Maybe in 10 years, if they can figure it out, but right now, absolutely not.
Before I move on to the last question, Miss Andrea, I think you had something you were trying to say earlier. Did you want to?
Well, no, I was just going to say that, you know, I think in African-American history, you know, the church and the school are intertwined, right? So, you know, friendship and First Congregational Church, I mean, they, you know, one of them had the boxcar and the, you know, and the other had some money, and that's how they created a school before they created a place of worship. And so I think when you're talking about, you know, our history, that those two things go together. One of the fun facts I like to say about Atlanta is that the first bachelor's degrees awarded in what's now Atlanta were awarded at Atlanta University. So it is both a legacy of Atlanta and a thing that is valuable in and of itself, whether or not it produces great careers or whatever. But I think our tradition, part of the Atlanta way, is that education is important. What's happened to the schools, you know, that again, that's a whole nother conversation. And, you know, what the state government did to the school system, but there is, but I think education is absolutely, you know, a core value of the Atlanta Way. Dr. Maynard Jackson's grandfather talked about the book, the ballot, and the buck. So, you know, fundamental is education to develop the rest of your aspirations. And again, we're, you know, always taught they can never take your education away from you.
Thank you. The last question I have for y'all is really so that we can end on a note where we're thinking about the future. And we've talked a lot about the past, talked a lot about where we are now, and some of our concerns moving forward. But I really want us to end thinking about our hopes and dreams for the future as it pertains to this new influx of people coming to the city, and how we can incorporate them into this broader story of community here in Atlanta. So what are your hopes and dreams for the new Atlanta that is forming today? And then we can end there and close out.
Well, I hope that the Atlanta Way is going to spread. We've seen Black political power expand to the whole metro area. And, you know, and I think, my hope is that it will extend to the state, and the values of what has really allowed Atlanta to be, you know, this leader, not just in the Southeast, but really globally, is something that continues to grow and spread. And, you know, as I talked about the book, the ballot, and the buck as, you know, sort of core tenets, that, you know, philanthropy, make money, give back, or as a Negro club women movement said, lift as you climb. And then understanding, you know, that transportation and tolerance are the foundation of our economy. And so to the extent that we are an inclusive community, a welcoming community, a place where diversity can thrive, that is part of the secret sauce of Atlanta's economy. And then, of course, you know, transportation from the railroad to the airport. You know, we are all about transportation, bringing people together, mixing and mingling ideas, spreading those back around the world. And to the extent that we really understand that, and that we work together to sort of spread this vision to Metro Atlanta and then to the state, and, you know, I think we can really thrive and help others to thrive as well.
I hope Atlanta continues to understand to make the pivot. If we've learned nothing about 2020, we learned that in the blink of an eye, you could be stuck in the house and have to figure out how to have meetings in the same platform that we're having right now. And so, especially in my space, from a commercial development perspective and the portfolio that I oversee at the airport, a lot of my role from a brand perspective in that part of the segment of my group is to make sure that people understand that the access, the infrastructure, and the value of coming to Atlanta. So from when Amazon was looking for their HQ, as was Microsoft, all those kind of what we call familiarization trips, they come through the airport. That's to use a stop. Right now, I'm working on some stuff for FIFA 2026 and some other things, because all roads lead to and through the airport is what we say. Atlanta begins with ATL, as in ATL, the airport. But with that, I think understanding the opportunity that comes with that, and albeit I love my Spelman, I do think the understanding of the growing trade industry is going to be very critical for us. A lot of the infrastructure that's being built around these type of Amazon, you know, freight logistics companies, everybody doesn't have to have a bachelor's degree to do very well. And so I think that pivot of what does that look like in a new space where everybody isn't ready to go, you know, down the HBCU path, but still wants to make a qualitative living for their family. Because what we know about is if people have jobs and they make money, they put back into their communities, they can buy homes, they can thrive economically. And I say on student loan debt, I won't bring that up. But I think understanding that Atlanta has made the pivot and can continue to do so. And then I think Atlanta, albeit ITP and OTP, there's room for everybody to thrive here. But I think everyone needs to understand to what sacred land you stand. And I think understanding and knowing that, I have friends who come in from other countries that can tell you so much about where they're from because it was required to know certain things about where you're from, right? And to know your creeds and your missions and all that. And I just hope that for Atlanta, I hope we're able to find a happy balance in welcoming the new, but also valuing the old. So I think it was what, make new friends, but keep the old. One is silver, the other is gold. Like that whole idea, being able to really value your treasure, both your silver and your gold in Atlanta is going to be really critical.
I close by sharing a lot that I've learned from my uncle, father figure, Walt Fluker. Growing up, Uncle would often say, now I don't know if he coined this, but he would say it to me, and I'm sure to Clint fairly often, that Atlanta is a small town with metropolitan aspirations. And I don't think he was just speaking about the infrastructure, right? Like Buckhead's unceasing desire to secede from the Union, or why MARTA can't seem to get me wherever I want to be. I really think he was talking about the people. There's always been this humble beginning, I think, about Atlanta, however tortured the Phoenix rises, and we've never wanted to be in New York. We've never looked abroad for the latest trends. We've always been right here, right now. And Jai, I heard you say, just as Hartsfield did, right? The city that's just too busy to hate. And even if Hartsfield was a bit more optimistic about that, he had an idea that he articulated, an aspiration for the city, which I still hold on to. I want Atlanta to show the world what the best future of so-called urban community can look like. That I do believe, based on this conversation, is going to require us to retell the story of Atlanta in new and exciting ways. I think the Beltline, just as an example, for me, having seen what different urban communities look like around the world now, that is a very exciting way of retelling our story. Infrastructure built atop old infrastructure. And Jai, I think you're right that there's some old school ways that need to be brought to bear as well. We just need to tell it. Schools are a great place to tell it. Church is a wonderful place to tell it. So let's do it. And then I think there has to be an actual articulation of the shared aspiration. I look to ethical and morally anchored Atlantan leaders like you, Miss Andrea, like you, Jai, to do that, at least until I can find the words myself. And then I do believe in some way we will have to, even to the point of imposition, invite new residents to be a part of it by naming it for them so they understand what the cultural expectation is, and they can be a part of that ambition.
Wow. Well, thank y'all. This was amazing. Jai Ferrell, Trey Watson, the Andrea Young, this was amazing. Thank you so much for being on this panel. Thank you for making me laugh, making me think, and for helping us kind of think through how we're going to continue to build this community here in the city of Atlanta. I'm supposed to pass it off now to Miriam Denard.
Thank you, Clint. And I echo his sentiments to Jai, to Trey, and to Andrea. Thank you all so much for sharing with us just all of your stories and just sharing your thoughts and your visions and hopes for Atlanta. It was just super inspiring. And that's exactly what we set out to do with these salons this summer with the ThrdSpace salons. This closes out our summer series. We had an amazing time putting together these events. If you want to know more about ThrdSpace, stay involved and stay updated on what we have going on. There's going to be a link in the description of this video where you can sign up for our mailing list so you can see all the things that we are working on and what we have in store in the future. So thank you to everyone for being here. Again, please make sure that you sign up for our mailing list, and we will see you guys next time. So the first one is give us 3 words that you feel make Atlanta special?
As in 3 adjectives?
3 adjectives, 3 words.
Because I was going to come up
Words.
with a 3-word sentence. It wasn't going to be very helpful. Maybe it would be. I mean, I can start off. 3 words: sultry, hometown, and Black.
My Black moral leadership.
Oh, that was great. Can I do mine again?
All right, Jai, you want to go?
Home, Spelman, and family for me.
That's what I like to hear. Spelman.
Or she do. That's the only reason she got me on this panel. I already know why.
What is your Atlanta anthem? What song would you say is your Atlanta anthem?
We heard from Andrea, so Trey is on you.
Oh, it's on. You already heard? I didn't hear. What was Andrea's? I gotta hear that.
There we go. Well, so, this is going to be a really interesting generational thing, right? Because mine is We Shall Overcome. So that just says a lot about my point of entry.
All right. Yeah. I'm going to go a different route, but I think it's also about Black moral leadership. Outcast Players Ball.
Oh, Trey, we get along real good, but that wasn't gonna be mine.
All right. What you got, Jai?
100% Liberation. Outcast and CeeLo Green. That's it. It was between that and Elevators, but it's definitely.
Yeah.
I was gonna say there's so many. I feel like it has to be an Outkast song, number one. Let me not knock We Shall Overcome. There's nothing like hearing We Shall Overcome blasting through your speakers driving down the street. But something about Liberation it's a
whole vibe. That's it.
And it always makes, it's like a very Atlanta song. I remember one time I had a friend from California come and we went out, we're going and dancing. And it was probably like Liberation or something came on in this nightclub. And she's like, I've never seen this much energy for a slow song. Like people are dancing just, I was like, that's Atlanta. So that was a good one. Kudos to you, Jai, for that one. All right. What is your favorite Atlanta restaurant?
Thumbs up. You got to get there early, but the food's good and the wait staff is always cool. They got great rules. You come here with attitude, you can leave. I love it.
Which thumbs up? Does it matter?
Thumbs up by my house. I live in Castleberry, so the one on Marietta.
Okay. So the original Pascal's, then the Beautiful, because they had pancakes all night, and then more recently Surface, but now of course because of gentrification it's closed.
Surface is closed.
They lost their lease. Yeah. Okay,
so yes, I wanted some salmon chips, and so we were doing a thing. Okay, we'll talk about that later. Oh my God.
So a very Atlanta thing right now.
Mm-hmm.
2 of my favorite restaurants have lost their leases.
Well, I used to live on top of the new Pascal's for several years before I bought my condo, so there goes the connection.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like all of the restaurants I used to frequent have gone on to a better place, perhaps. I will say a newly discovered, it's an old restaurant. My wife and I moved the kids down to Atlanta 3 years, almost 4 years now, I guess, ago. And we moved to Virginia Highlands, which is an area of town that is close to my office, but it's also an area that I've wanted to live in. I kind of want to lay some claim to that land, if you will. So we bought a place here. And George's, which is an old institution here, I've met the youngest son of the the original owner. And it's
Mm.
just a remarkable story, Lebanese family. And I don't know that you would know it unless you actually ask them, but it is got to be like my Cheers, in part because it's so close, but because everybody knows my name, they know the kids' names, and there's something really lovely about having a place where you feel like you're being taken care of. Used to be a number of those places, like the old Pascals on MLK, when my grandparents and I, would leave from church and stop by. Everybody knew Dr. Watson, and that was something special. But I really like George's. They're good, great burgers.
I'm surprised. What about I'm gonna just throw this one in there. It wasn't one of our questions, but what about the best wings in Atlanta?
I want to know.
Definitely JR Crickets. The original one that was across the street from the Varsity before it burned down, because it's not the same now that it's on the corner. What is that? Not Linden. What's that little street? But you know what I'm talking about. I just passed it. It used to be IHOP back in the day, but now it's JR Crickets. But the original JR Crickets was across the street from
the Varsity.
Varsity on Spring. Was it on Spring?
It was on Spring.
Yeah, I remember that from high school days though, but yeah.
Yeah, they had a random fire and then it caught on fire again, but now it's like a green space on the backside of Goodfellows. It's like random.
Yeah, the JR Crickets on North, where that IHOP was.
It ain't the same.
After a certain time, there's a line to get in. It's like it looks like a club. You would think it's a club, not a chicken wing restaurant. What about you, Trey? What are the best wings?
Honestly, I think I have some feedback. I would go with Jai on that one. That's the memory of the best wings was from that JR Crickets in high school. A cousin of mine had come in town from Kansas City, and I don't know where she got this money from, but she had every intention of blowing it. So she took all of the youngest to everywhere, Whitewater, Six Flags, Chuck E. Cheese, you name it, and JR Crickets. And I just remember the taste. I'm like, what is this? I believe it might have been the first time I had it, like 9th grade.
They have the best blue cheese too. Like it's real. I got it. Yeah, it's a whole situation.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're gonna eat today.
Since then, I've been on a hunt for whatever the fellas on Atlanta were talking about, the lemon pepper wet. I was like, I don't even think this exists.
Oh no, it's real.
Yeah, they have it at JR Crickets.
But you have to get, like, I don't like hot food, so I get a mild, but then I get lemon pepper sprinkles on the side, and then you get a jumbo blue cheese.
Come on, Jai, with the tips. That's definitely going on the social media.
Yes, because I'm not a big lemon peppery person either, but the sprinkles is a game changer.
I'm gonna go on mute right now while I take these notes like a piano.
I am definitely Atlanta. I think that's probably why I'm on this call, but yeah.
That's right. Yes.
That's exactly why you're on this call.
That's right.
We came up with the title and immediately I was like, I think we need Jai for this.
Love it. I love it.
Maybe we'll do like one or two more, Miriam. And
yeah. So the next one, what street did each of you grow up on what street did each of you grow up on in Atlanta?
Andrea, I have to hear this from you first.
I was gonna let Andrea go first.
So right, we initially moved to Mosley Park, Chickamauga Place.
My big mama stays off of Chickamauga and Sharon Street. We're right there.
So Chickamauga was, of course, a Civil War battle. And so that's where we, till I was 12. So from 6 to 12, we lived there. And then, my folks moved to Southwest Atlanta. But, my real childhood was walking up to the Ashby Theater for 15-cent movies.
Yeah.
Ashby Theater, wow.
Going to the Mosley Park pool. And, so, yeah.
Jai, where'd you grow up?
So my grandmother, so it was a couple of different places. So my grandmother and my grandparents lived off of Commercial, off of Bankhead. So it was like right there. And then my grandmother's father, my papa, he lived off of Commodore Drive. And then when my grandmother and grandfather decided to have children, they relocated to Decatur. But my church is Angie Street Baptist Church on the corner of what is it? Lowry and Lindsay, right off of North Avenue and all that stuff. So it's so weird because that's home. And then when I went to Spelman, and I've always lived in town since then. I never went back.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I guess like each of you, I started one place, and as I grew, went from always find grounding in grandparents. So my earliest memories are near ITC. So I lived off what was Beckwith Court. I went to Oglethorpe Elementary School right there between ITC and Morris Brown. After I guess it only went up to the 5th grade. After 5th grade, I moved to live with my grandmother while my mom started a business out in Decatur. So during the weeks, I was in Collier Heights, A-Line Drive, right in between Herman Russell and the Blue Flame. And then on the weekends, I was off Wesley Chapel.
Welcome to Decatur. That's so excellent.
Where's greater?
Good.
Technically, it's greater in the city of Decatur. I just want to point that out.
Oh my gosh, I just left the dog. I wish y'all could see our food. We just left the farmer's market. When they're going to finish the whole annex thing over there? It's a hot mess.
It's not. And then last we'll do, what high school did you guys attend?
So Southwest High School, it's now Junior Young Middle School, and of course the high school is Mays.
The Westminster schools.
Oh, your parents had money. I went to Southwest DeKalb High School.
Not quite. Not quite.
Did you M out there? You did something, because ain't nobody just going to Westminster.
I know one thing. They read a lot of books.
Yeah, that's right. They read a lot of books. Yeah, there's a story behind that, but I won't trouble you with it. But yeah, it was a family affair, to be sure, to get me, Clint, Hamp through there.
All right. Well, I think we'll end it there.